This is a really cool thing for me to be doing. I have to sort of front up. Shriekback, who was kind of the lesser known of Dave's biggest bands, was my favourite band of the 80s, hands down. I went and saw them 4 times live when they came to New Zealand, which wasn't very often. And
it's a long way, Andrew.
It is a long way to go. I know. I live a long way away now. And so this is, even at that level alone, this is a real honour for me. But also, as somebody who reads a lot of this stuff, like a lot of stuff written about music online, to actually sort of kind of sit and have a conversation with one of the people you think are kind of the smartest in this area, it's a really great thing to be able to do. There was some stuff that I didn't get, and there was stuff that I want to talk about, but Matt introduced me as one of the things as a prolific blogger. I haven't been quite so prolific recently, but I did write a blog post a couple of nights ago that Dave referred to, which is these are the things that I want to talk about when I get the chance to talk to Dave Allen from Beast Music. And it was kind of a list of questions that I think that when you have these sorts of conversations, they're always the things that seem absent to me from those. So, and you did address several of them along the way, but there's a few that I want to get to.
Yeah.
But I want to establish a few things up front before we sort of get to this. One of the things that strikes me, and maybe it's the format of the blog or the journal article or the newspaper article, but it does seem to be an exercise in trying to divide the world into goodies and baddies, which doesn't make sense to me. It's one of the things that, like for instance, that if you're against Spotify, then you're against the internet. This idea that you can't criticize an institution's practices and be able to separate that out from the idea that actually I'm in favour of all things kind of forward-looking and contemporary and streaming and so on. I just think that the way in which they do this is bad, and so dividing those things up. It's like one of the things that I didn't get about your presentation was equating Amanda Palmer's Kickstarter campaign with her criticism of streaming, and I thought those are 2 different uses of the internet. They're entirely different functions and characteristics. It's like saying I use email but I don't use Twitter, which are both forms of communication. I don't like Twitter because X, and I like email because Y. So well, you can't have one without the other. I don't think is an argument that you can really make.
Well, I mean, that's a good point, but I'm going to stick to it if I can.
Sure.
I mean, when people, let me step back a second. Really, what I'm suspecting is happening is that the internet, is an equal opportunity provider and destroyer. We know that, right?
Hang on. That's a really great bumper sticker.
Yeah.
But B, a really condensed, packed thing that kind of needs some unpacking. What do you mean it's an equal opportunities?
I didn't see people rioting in the street when travel agents got put out of business by the internet.
No, okay.
Right. And so we all switched to using Expedia, for instance, and travel agents they all lose their jobs and disappear, and no one seems to care at all.
Okay.
Right. Amanda raises $1.3 million on Kickstarter, which would not have been possible even a decade ago. It'd be really difficult to raise $1.3 million because of the platform. And then the platform also provides access to streaming music now.
That's not the platform that's doing that. Now, this is the thing that we need to understand, because the internet is not one thing. It's an enabling technology. It's like electricity. She's in favour of electric toothbrushes, but not in favour of chainsaws. Mm-hmm. That's got nothing to do with electricity. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, should she also be in favour of Silk Road? Should she also be in favour of, there are uses to which the internet is put that people can have positions about that they can separate out from other uses of the internet, surely. I mean, I don't want to get stuck on this point, but it seems like that's a kind of
I think it's a good
thing to establish.
It's a good starting point. I just see it though as perhaps how should I say this? I mean, perhaps it's just unfortunate that when we're looking at a technological system that's only 2 decades old, literally, it was just in April that it turned 21, right?
Which system are we talking about?
The internet, the platform.
The web.
Oh, sorry, the web, yes.
Right,
once we got
it,
yeah. That's another problem, isn't it? We mix up internet with web. So once we got the web browser,
Yeah.
That's been about 21 years,
Sure.
which has enabled us all to access the internet, where a lot of the data lies, and then we can bring it up in lovely pictures and diagrams and,
Sure.
and text that's not just a little green square going across the screen.
Mm.
And I just think it's unfortunate that with Amanda's, her point of view there is like it's all bells and whistles and hooray, and flags are waving and the bunting's out, and I just raised 1.3 million, and everybody in the media just goes on about how fantastic it is.
Yeah.
But then, perhaps I'm wrong. I'm always willing to be wrong. I'm probably one of the few people in the blogosphere that actually admits they're wrong, and so I want points for that. Okay. That when she turns around and criticizes streaming music services, and Spotify's always been the biggest whipping post of all. It just seems like, okay, to your point then, okay, so it's okay to use one corner of the internet and a particular platform on the internet called Kickstarter, but it's not okay to see the future of music distribution that could benefit not just musicians, but it benefits music fans greatly. Like, do you want to take away these things, or should we take away Kickstarter?
See, I can't
Well,
see
do we
those things
take
as
away?
connected.
No, I know, but I do. I'm seeing
Right.
them as somewhat connected because the electric toothbrush and the electric saw, to me, are way further apart. I think there's a little bit of something closer between the future of music, and I'll tell you why. Because when Amanda raised $1.3 million, she showed us the future of music right there. She showed it to us.
Do you really think so?
I think so. It gave her all this money that she didn't need, way more than she needed, to create her art and get it out in front of her fans. And how are fans gonna access this music on the streaming music services?
Well, okay, that's a much longer conversation to be had, because the idea that that's typical of anything, or likely to point towards the way in which most musicians are ever going to have that experience. I don't know how many musicians there are in this room, but I suspect that most of them, if they put their music on Kickstarter and appeal to their fans, they would not receive $1.3 million or anything like that.
No, but they might say to 10,000 and get 15,000.
Or they might not meet their target. I mean,
yeah.
But these things aren't indicative of anything, is my point.
No.
And so Amanda Palmer is not, the same way that Beck is not an example of anything. It's like the example I give is, do you remember the $1 Million homepage? This kid at a university, this is about, 12 years ago now, this kid at a university, I say kid, he was probably in his early 20s, but he put up a website where you could buy 1 pixel for $1, and you could buy, so a 10 by 10 pixel thing was $100, and you could put whatever you wanted on an advertisement or whatever. And he said, there are 1 million pixels for sale. And it sold out in just a few weeks, and he made $1 million. You know what didn't work? The second $1 million homepage. Somebody else thought, that's a great idea, I'll do that.
Yeah.
And I think that's the sorts of things that happens with the Amanda Palmers and the Becks and the rest of it. Novelty works in this space.
Mm-hmm.
So nobody's inventing examples of anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of one of the things that I wanted to establish, is that these examples of, look, it's all changed, are just, no, this is what Beck did. And that's as far as it goes. I mean, Beck did something that actually wasn't new. He did something that was old.
Yeah. I mean, we see examples of old and new colliding all of the time.
I'm going to say,
but in my presentation, I'm only using Beck as, here's a guy who sat down for a minute and thought about it. That's all.
There's something else I should establish, of course. I love the Beck thing. I went to the Beck concert. He actually brought a bunch of people together at the Barbican and performed it with some fantastic bands and acts. And it was a really great concert. Bought the book. I'm somebody who buys vinyl, and so all of these things are complex and are kind of interesting in that respect. But the thing that I want to get to is that streaming isn't a natural way in which the internet works. It's an invention that somebody came up with using the parameters and the affordances of the platform, and it's not a necessary component of the internet. And therefore, to sort of aim that because internet, therefore it's the future, there have been lots of things that have been invented for the internet, just as there have been lots of things that have been invented for electricity. And to say that it's the future and it's a natural way, no, it's just some things that people invented. And like Lawrence Lessig said, the code is law. You get to set the parameters when you get to set up the business. And so these organisations are, I mean, Beats is one of them, it's set up to benefit the shareholders. And there might be other ways in which those businesses can be organised that we haven't explored yet. And if we're not allowed to criticise them, we might not get to explore these other opportunities.
I think there's been plenty of criticism of the music streaming services. It's getting to be a broken record. No pun intended.
Yeah.
But okay, so if I say the future of music streaming services, I'm talking about the future of a new recording service, if you will, or system. You know, they do tend to be systems, unfortunately. So we've been railing against the old recording system for many years now, right? And people were very unhappy with where's my money, even before there was an internet. You know, for Gang of Four to discover if we got paid our royalties correctly or not, we have to hire at our own cost, our own accountants, and if we're wrong, right, we lose more money than we might have made anyway. So you just don't.
Why are recordings interesting? I mean, the reason I ask is because I kind of think of these things as going through different ages of media. We had an age before recorded music where it was about sheet music. The main way in which you'd kind of distribute or consume music, you'd walk into a shop, you'd buy pieces of paper, you'd take them home, look at the dots on the page and play it. And then during the recorded music era, the electric age of recordings and broadcasting, there were recordings of music and they were, you know, arbitrarily 40 minutes long, but you bought them and you took them home, you sat down, shut up and listened to them. Why is, in this new age of media, the kind of almost to a fetish level, focusing on trying to make money from the recordings, when actually what people seem to want to do is participate in music? I mean, you can look at all of the Pharrell Williams Happy thing, for instance, where people are all making their own videos of it.
Yeah.
They want to be able to kind of engage with it and participate in it. And yet when we talk about the music industry on the internet, what we talk about is moving recordings around in a different way. Why is that the thing?
Well, I don't quite understand the question actually. I mean, what we've been seeing forever. I mean, you know, my pal Tom York, when he did his sort of performance at dancing, and it ended up being cut to Beyonce and getting another 7 million views. That's interacting with music, right? Streaming music services, as far as I can see, are just looking at where people, particularly young people, want to access music. And I think you're trying to get at something like, well, why is music recorded? So you could read the David Grubbs book, you know, and find that people don't actually want it recorded. Is that the only way of delivering it? And so on. You know, we could go through the list, right? What we're doing, in a sense, by we I mean any company that wants to supply demand has to supply it in a particular way. So like you, I buy vinyl records, and I prefer to buy vinyl records that come with a coupon where I can download the MP3. Now, it's because my generation, arguably, is more tactile than the younger generations, you know. With the younger generations, I noticed with my 3 children growing up, my daughter used to be wandering around with an early iPod, and she'd accidentally chopped one of the earphones off probably cutting her hair or something. And she was quite happy just with one earphone, right? To an audiophile, that is the end of the world, you know. It's like, how can she possibly listen to music like that? It's like, well, how could you possibly judge her for doing that? We have to be careful about trying to make this, you know, what I sense is you think that there's and I could be wrong, but it feels a little bit like you're looking at it's just one mass part of society that's doing something that you're uncomfortable with because you want it to be something else. But what I'm seeing is there's areas of society that are very different. So the older demo, like me, you know, I've only grown up with, I remember going to the record store to buy that vinyl album that the clerk had told me 2 weeks ago, like Led Zeppelin 2's coming out. And I put my pocket money down to pay in advance so I could get a copy before all my friends rushed in and bought them all. You know, I remember that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not, I'm not nostalgic for it. It was just how we access music then.
Right, so I haven't made myself clear because the point that I was making was the opposite one.
Okay.
Which is that things like Spotify and Beats Music and WIMP and Audio and all the streaming music services are all part of the old way of doing things. They're all part of the recorded music industry. And all that's changed, all that's shuffling the deck chairs around on the Titanic is about finding different ways to having people not have to go to a record shop anymore. And actually there's the capacity with the internet as a platform to think of new things to do with music that aren't just about moving recordings around.
Right. Yeah, but okay, I think in defense of Beats, for instance, we've only been around 3 months, right? And what you don't know, and I can't tell you or the audience here, is what we're coming up with. Because we don't have to. We're a private company, and we don't want to see if Spotify goes and does a deal with Sprint because we did a deal with AT&T. This is just ridiculous in a sense. It's like, really? Why didn't you do something better, bigger, better, right? Then we might look at you and go, boy, shit, we better get our ducks in a row. We feel we're getting our ducks in a row. And I just can't tell you what's coming next, but honestly, it's going to start unfolding this year, and I think you'll be quite surprised. But to your point about we're shifting music around, the problem is, at the moment, we're only shifting music around that we can gain access to. But now, if you look at the data of who gets played through these music streaming services, it just looks like the Billboard Top 100.
Who gets to look at that data? Who gets to look at my data?
No one gets to look at your data, as far as I know. I don't know, actually. I mean, I know that we have data at Beach that shows people are signing up now through the new iOS app, right? Because it wasn't there until last Wednesday, and it's been the take-up's been really strong because we knew that people were using the iOS on the iPhones to listen to Beats, right? But we don't know who they are and what they're doing. But data is interesting, and everyone's going there, right? One of the big demands, and I hear all the time, is when can we see the data? And that might be something that I can't tell you about because we might be able to show it to you very soon.
Just to change tack slightly,
I didn't say that. Erase that.
Just to change tack slightly, you mentioned the Long Tail, Chris Anderson's book, and the idea that eventually everything will get played, everything will get heard, everything will get discovered. But that's not actually the case. That's not what we're finding out. Like, for instance, the figures came out recently that over 65% of everything that's been that's available to listen to on Spotify has never been played before. And Paul Lemare from the Echo Nest did this great hack, which some of you might have seen, called Forgotify. And it will only play things that have never been played before on Spotify, which is a really interesting kind of case study. But it does raise an interesting point that a lot of this received wisdom about the kind of the egalitarian nature of the internet is made up.
Yeah, well, no, not in a sense, because when did the Long Tail come out?
Like 10 years ago, like 2005.
So that he was only looking at one source, that was Rhapsody.
Sure.
But it's still worth thinking about as an example of what could be in terms of data. So that, yes, Forgotify.
Yeah.
That sounds brilliant. And I love the internet for that, because you can just do that, right? I love that you can do that. Anything like that on the internet.
It's the playfulness of the hack space that I'm with you. I think that's a really great thing to be able to do.
Well, I've always said the internet is more punk than punk rock, right? Because its ability to be disruptive or non-disruptive is really quite remarkable. And I see things on the internet that I just tell my friends, like, this is what the web's for. And it might just be a cat doing something stupid. I don't know, but you gotta have some sort of brevity amongst the levity, and so I'm not quite sure what you want to see. When I was looking at the questions you were proposing to ask me, there's some things in there that didn't make sense to me either.
Right. Okay. Well, let's try this one, because the one that I'm kind of as a music collector, as a recordings collector, somebody who buys records, and this is my record collection, and when I got an iPod, I could put 10,000 songs on it. So what are my 1,000 favorite albums of all time? This is who I am. It's in my pocket. It's my identity. And one of the things that I kind of feel with streaming services, and maybe again this is because I'm an old man now, is that takes away this idea of ownership as identity, as I am the person who collected this or amassed this particular selection of music. It just becomes almost like going to the library and pulling out somebody else's record, playing it for a bit and putting it back, but it's not mine. Is there anything lost in that, you think, in terms of I mean, I don't want to be nostalgic again, but although I am nostalgic about that, but is identity kept through music consumption, I guess is the question.
Well, you mean your identity?
anybody's identity through streaming music services. Do people build identity in that way? This is my music.
Well, no, but where's the association of music identity people? You know, it's like it feels like it's a singular activity for you.
Do you think I'm the only person who constructs identity?
No, but right now you are.
Oh, in this room perhaps. So there's a hand up at the back.
Yeah.
Another disambiguation, which is that there really is a difference between a record and a CD and a stream. A CD and a stream are the same. You know, these are measurements of parameters, which when you put them through a processing machine, recreate a simulacra of the original music. A record is a record of music. That is an absolute difference between the file and the record.
Are you saying that it's because it's analog and it's a waveform?
When you collect records, you have collected a thing which is existing physically in the world. When you collect CDs or streams, you're collecting a series of measurements which can then be used to process.
No, that's true of records too.
Sorry?
That's true of records too.
Yeah, I mean, a
Well,
CD
the
is
thing
still
with
a
a record,
thing.
you
To
can
say-
run it with a waterfall, or you can run it with a steam engine and it will still play the record.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that is music.
No, but to me, a record is a different category of object.
Oh, to me
a
as
CD
well.
or a stream.
But to me, a CD is a different category of object. I think a CD has more in common with a record than it has with a stream because it's a different format. The shift from, for me, I don't know, you might have a different opinion about this. The shift from record to CD is a change in format. The shift from CD to streaming is akin to the shift from sheet music to records. It's
But
that
for me,
big
it would be
difference.
the other way. I think the CD is an inefficient file store.
Then there's a longer conversation to be had about how we kind of define things.
But going back to your identity piece is, let's use books as another analogy.
Sure.
So I collect hardback books. I collect old hardback books, preferably signed. I'm just one of those guys. So if you come to my house, you'll see the living room full of bookshelves.
Yeah.
And I purposely don't have a Kindle or use the Kindle app on my iPad. I want those books to represent me.
Yeah.
I think that's where you're going.
Yeah, absolutely.
The last thing they'll do is go to my iPad and start looking for my music.
But for me, the identity is not about performance. It's not about showing people who I am. It's about me knowing who I am.
Right.
About having a kind of, this is my life all in one little box, which
Right.
I really like.
I know, but that's a bit that I'm slightly confused about because there's a presumption there that if others use streaming music services, then they are not identifying personally with it.
No, I'm just asking if they do.
Well, how do we know?
I
mean,
I
we can't answer that
anecdotally
question.
would be the only way to do that. I mean, Steve brought out something interesting. I'm not a user of Spotify. I was on eMusic for a long time, probably while you were there.
Yeah.
And then I stopped giving my £10 a month to eMusic because what I would do is I would spend it all once the moment it came out, usually at 3 o'clock in the morning and usually on weird ambient electronic stuff that I didn't want to listen to the next day. And so when I shifted to Spotify, I thought I'll pay my £10 and I'll have access to all this music.
Right.
And now, and I guess partly because I work with Bandcamp, but that money is earmarked for Bandcamp now because I know that it goes at least 85% to the artists who made the music, but also because my problem with Spotify, again, was not that people weren't getting paid, because I know that Spotify pay over 70% of what they receive out in royalties. I mean, it's not the question of are they paying enough? They don't get enough to pay more. They can't really be asked to pay more than 70% of it. The problem is that 70% of it goes to people who don't pass it on quite often. But also so the per stream thing is a function of how much money they get in divided by how many people are listening. And so the obvious answer is Spotify aren't charging enough. So that wasn't my problem with Spotify. My problem with Spotify was, what if I only listen to one song this month and I pay £10? Does the person whose song I listen to, what proportion of that do they get? What if I listen to one album 100 times and nothing else? Again, as a listener, what proportion of my money is going to the people that I listen to? Is that value? And there is no way of finding that out.
No.
And I suspect that there is no correlation whatsoever between the money that I spend and the artists that I want to support and who actually gets the money.
Yeah, and I have nothing to say to that. You're right, other than you're right, because we don't know Spotify's business plan ultimately. We don't know their financials and so on. And it's the same with Beats. When I hear or read, articles about all the streaming music services, like here comes Beats, but so what? Because Spotify and Beats and Pandora, they're all going to be out of business soon. And you feel like, I can't do this, but you feel like calling up the reporter / journalist who wrote the article or blogger and say, how the hell did you get your hands on the Beats Music business plan? Right?
Right, yeah.
'Cause you're just making things up in the press or
Yeah.
in the media, which then becomes gospel, and it's really annoying. And that's the bit that I really rail against, but I have to contain that. At some point, I fully expect at some point there's going to have to be a lot of transparency, right? And I'm not scared of transparency. I don't think the model that Spotify has or Beats has, at some point, if there's enough transparency, it might be like, oh my God, there's the difference. Right now, I'm just interested in having a talk about, can we debate like this about what a future can be to get musicians paid? That seems to be the key, because musicians will always push back hard. They have been pushing back hard against Spotify, but never pushing back hard against other, like YouTube. It's weird. It's like, there's more going on YouTube than there is in Spotify, right? As you know.
It's the single biggest music streaming platform on the planet.
Exactly. And so it's like trying to get to Pluto or something. It doesn't matter. Where if you're playing catch up, you've got a long way to go.
Yeah.
And yet again, these arguments come up around money and streaming music services, and I just think that detracts from the opportunity to talk about how we can make things better. I mean, I think you had it in one of your questions. Is it awful for me to be going around?
No, is it weird for you to be defending Spotify all the time?
Well, I'm not defending Spotify.
Because they're a competitor.
I only joined Beats in January, and I admitted I was wrong about streaming music services in the Guardian article that was last October.
Right.
But again, what's wrong with admitting that you're wrong?
No, absolutely. More
Right.
people should do that.
So I'm not defending Spotify. I'm just saying that I'd forgotten for a second, because I got caught up in all of the talk around money, right, which is emotional, and then I realized, I've forgotten the users. Like, even so far, you haven't really talked about the music fan in this little part of the discussion.
Sure.
Whereas I only think about the music fan all of the time. Maybe that's because people like you came to our shows in New Zealand 4 times, and that's really important.
Yeah.
And if we can look at it that way, and not look at it like a bunch of engineers shifting some MP3s using modern technology across devices that can play back through all sorts of headphones, we might just be able to have a better conversation. Not you and I mean generally.
No, I think beer would make this a better conversation, but
Yeah.
What brings me to one of the questions that I did put out there is the idea that all of these conversations seem to be about, they seem to be about money, but they seem to be about what's better for musicians.
Yeah.
And it seems like the better question would be, what's better for music? And that's what I like about what you're saying, is that it is an ecosystem that includes music fans and people who don't care very much about music, or clearly because they only listen to it in one ear.
I used to listen to John Peel under the blankets in my bed, because my mother wouldn't let me. No, I like it. It's like when I was a young kid wanting to hear John Peel late on a Saturday night, because he was on 10 till midnight, and my mother insisted when I was young, you go to bed and go to sleep. I was under there with the transistor radio, and then later on, as I was a teenager, I didn't have to go to bed at 9 o'clock. I bought a Grundig 5-inch tape reel and recorded John Peel, so I could listen to it all week. We find ways to get it out.
We had to rely on friends of cousins who were living in the UK and could send back cassette tapes.
Yes.
And I mean, so that kind of discovery thing, but getting the music, that doesn't. I mean, that seems to be a problem that's been solved now. But the John Peel
getting
bit,
the music.
the John Peel bit is the bit that hasn't been solved yet.
Well, I'd like to think though that I might be stepping on thin ice here, but what we're attempting to do at Beats is have a sort of a John Peel-ish view of things. Like, we don't want to use too much, technology to say what you might like. We want to try and find artists who build some playlists that include obscure bands. You know, why isn't Matching Mole all over beats?
That's a really interesting cognitive dissonance, because you don't want to trust the technology to do the because.
Well, because maybe because I grew up listening to John Peel under the blankets. You know, like maybe I'm just coming at it from a completely different angle than someone else in beats might come at it.
But that's the biggest policy, that algorithms are not as good as human choice.
Absolutely, and that's why I love being there, because they're, you know, the employees themselves will build playlists, and I mean, just since I joined the company, I've come across so much great music that, like yourself, at the middle of the night after some wine or too much wine, I'm downloading all sorts of stuff, and it's like, you know, I go and listen to it the next day, it's like, sounded so much better after a bottle of wine. You know, so I'm into music, and so we didn't answer your question, and I say we because we're doing this together. You know, what can we do for music?
Yeah.
That's very important. And what do you think we can do for music? What would you like to see we do for music?
What would I like to see beats do for music, or what would I like to see happen for music?
Both.
Because, okay, I work with a lot of independent musicians, and this is at the long tail end of things, if you want to use that category.
Yeah.
And there is still a lottery-winning mentality to the recorded music industry.
Yeah.
And there is still the dream of I want to go on tour and be on television and be famous and make all of the money. And there is that kind of, that money doesn't get passed down.
Right.
Is there a way of re-architecting the music industry space,
Yes,
so that it is more egalitarian?
No, I think there is. I don't know. You know, I've talked to so many people today, but I just recalled last Tuesday again when I'd met with a whole bunch of managers, and I don't want to name names because it was a private meeting, but one of them said something about can Beats do more promotions, because he considered as a retailer.
Right.
And I was like, well, I like the idea of that, but currently we're not a retailer, we're a distributor. And then it gave me another idea that might help musicians, is if the managers go back to the table and say, hey, you never used to take 50% of our distribution money, why are you taking it now? Because if they look at the streaming music services as distributors of music, then they may have a different discussion with the labels. Because we can't go on their behalf to do that. That's a little bit like, you know, McDonald's franchisees telling McDonald's what kind of burger they should come up with. You know, it's the other way around, right? And so, yes, you know, the system, the old system that's been crushed a bit into the sort of new system is not the best, and we need to somehow clean house and start again. And I think that's why Geiger went for 2 decades, not even 1 decade. It's like, you know, I'll be a very older person when we solve this, I think, but it's definitely worth trying.
Well, let's wrap this up with, I guess part of what you're saying is, on the whole, streaming is a net positive for musicians, or has the potential to be.
It has the potential to be, and I think it should be part of the pie for the time being.
Is it a net positive for music as a whole?
That I can't tell you. You know, if millions of people are enjoying Pharrell's Happy, you would have a hard time convincing them that that's not a positive thing to listen to Pharrell on streaming music services, no more than you would be able to persuade them that listening to it on the radio that's highly compressed in their cars is a bad thing. You know, and I'm very wary of treating subsets of society in different ways. You know, it tends to be amalgamated, if you will. You know, and let's just step back for a minute. You know, you have these big festivals, and it's amazing how you can get 60 to 100,000 people in one big field. And even if you don't know each other, you know, you're patting each other on the back, and like, isn't this great? We just have this innate love of music, and that must never be forgotten. And I really believe that's in the DNA of Beats. And I'm not saying it's not in the DNA of the others, but I know it's in the DNA of Beats. So that's how I can talk about it. But I didn't come to the UK and Ireland to talk about Beats or create
thoughts, as I said earlier on, an exposition of ideas and theories and thoughts that lead to something better in the debate world. And then from the debating, if we can get David and Tom on stage, and me and you and others having a round table, not a panel, just like you would
Conversation.
invite to my home all of you, and we'll have some food and wine and talk. This is how things used to get done back, other centuries. People gathered and talked. You didn't write, well, the church did, but I mean, you didn't necessarily write screeds and just send them out into the world. You actually tried to debate. And I think we've lost two things: the art of debate and apologizing for being wrong.
Well, I'll take you up on that. I'm running Music Tech Fest in New York at NYU in December. David Byrne's going to be there. I'd like to invite you to come and have a conversation.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've actually learned a lot, and I really appreciate that.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
David.